pins, pinning, fresh pins, repinning, duplicate pins. There are so many words and it's all very confusing. Hey guys, it's Tabby with Simple Pin Media. We are here to help you effectively market on Pinterest. Okay, so I don't want you to overthink it. It should not be complicated. It shouldn't be confusing, but I do realize there are a lot of words that are thrown out, either by Pinterest themselves or Pinterest experts, Pinterest marketing experts. We all have all these words and it becomes confusing and you don't know what you're supposed to do or not do. So let's talk about that. Specifically, I want to talk about fresh pins, but we'll also talk about semantics. Really, that's what this is about, semantics. So first, basic question, what is pinning? Pinning is really just the idea of bookmarking something. Kind of like, you know, if you're on a website and you want to save it for later, you bookmark it. That is what pinning is. But it's a way of organizing everything you're bookmarking. You get to take a pin that has to do with a certain topic and you get to save it into a specific board that is related to that topic. And then you can easily find that pin because it's earmarked in a specific board. It was a great invention, really great. I love Pinterest. Like as a pinner, I love Pinterest. But that's for the pinner, you know? That's how a pinner pins. I don't know why I'm doing this so much. I don't really need to. If I am talking to you who is likely the business owner or creator who is trying to get the pinner to pin your content, then pinning for you is actually different than what pinning looks like for a pinner, or shall we say user. I did it again. Here's the difference. If I'm a business owner and we're talking about pinning, if I have to go pin, then I'm talking about putting my content out onto Pinterest so that other people, so that the users of Pinterest, your audience, can see it and save it on their boards. That is pinning for you. Just want you to keep that in mind while I talk about all of these words today. So fresh pin, let's talk about that. Every single time we here at Simple Pin have a live call, webinar, town hall, anything like that, where it's like we, welcome questions and people can drop their questions. Almost every single time we get at least one person to ask about fresh pins. They ask things like, does everything that I put out onto Pinterest, does it have to be a fresh pin every single time? Like that's probably the most common question around the word fresh pins, words, the phrase fresh pins. I'm going to link below a podcast that Kate and I recorded together, and it was about this topic of fresh pins and how do we combat this common question that we get. And we go into the history of where fresh pins comes from. It came back in 2020 when Tailwind and Pinterest had this little live call thing, and Pinterest kind of gave guidelines on fresh pins and pinning frequency and content that you're pinning. And it was actually a very confusing call. It was interesting. Anyway, if you want all the backstory, go listen to that podcast. It's linked below. So to answer that question about fresh pins, no, every single pin that you put out on Pinterest does not need to be a brand new pin and you only pin it to one board and then that's it. That's the only time you ever pin it. I've talked about this before. What we do here at Simple Pin is we create one piece of core content every single week, and that would be our podcast. And then we embed that into a blog post. We create 2 pin images for that piece of content every week, but we're actually pinning 10 pins per day. So that means not only am I pinning a fresh pin every week, at least one, but I am also pinning other pins that I have pinned before over and over again. It's just a combination. It's a well-rounded strategy. That's how you should think of this. Don't overthink it into one little corner, okay? I don't want you to hear fresh pins and so then that's all you ever do, or 20 pins a day and that's all you ever do, or pinning once and that's all you ever do. Typically, if you hear something like that where it's hard lined, typically that means that it's probably not good Pinterest marketing advice. Here at Simple Pin, we have been managing clients' accounts for almost 10 years. We have managed hundreds of accounts. And what we have found is because number one size does not fit all when it comes to a specific kind of Pinterest marketing strategy. Because you're going to have different niches, you're going to have different industries. And number two, usually having a diversified way of marketing on Pinterest is probably your best bet. This means creating a few video pins a week, daily pinning. The amount of pins doesn't matter as much as being consistent. So if you are a business that has been creating content for year over year over year, you have all this backlog of content, you could probably handle 10 to 15 pins a day. If you are a newer business and you don't have a ton of content yet, then anywhere from 1 to 5 pins per day is fine, as long as you're being consistent. Add to that ads if it's in your budget. Let me get back to fresh pins. The big takeaway that I want to give you today is that when Pinterest brought up fresh pins, they weren't saying that they only want brand new content, a brand new pin every single time you put something out on Pinterest. They were saying that they needed more variety. They want you to be creating consistently new content, ideally weekly. If you can do like once a week, perfect. Obviously, if you can do more than that, that's even better. And then with each piece of content, create 2 to 3 pins. Some people took that call with Pinterest and Tailwind and said, oh, you want me to create brand new pins every single time I go and pin. So they would create like literally 50 pins per piece of content. That's way too much. Don't do that. That's not going to even work. Pinterest can tell that you are pinning the same URL and over and over again. Don't do that. It doesn't work. Diversify. Create a few pins per piece of content. Get that out. Disperse it. So let's talk about the words repinning, saving, pinning again, duplicate pins. What's the correct term? Repinning is kind of an old word, and Pinterest stopped using that word back in the day a few years ago because it was confusing. So let's just take that one out. Let's not even talk about that one. That's just something we shouldn't even be saying. Saving. If we talk about saving a pin, that's really when we are talking about a pinner, a user on Pinterest. They'll be scrolling in their feed and they'll see a pin they want to keep on one of their boards. So they'll hit that save button on the pin. That is something that you as a business owner, creator, putting content on Pinterest, you don't want to do that. You don't want to save one of your pins to another one of your boards. That's not how you distribute your pins. So saving, we are talking about the pinner or the user on Pinterest. But we can say pinning again. So as a business owner, let's say I take a pin image that went to last week's podcast blog post. I'm going to upload that onto Tailwind. I'm going to add the title, the description, the URL, and then I'm going to add all of the relevant boards that I want it to go to. And I'm going to interval that pin, which really just means there's a amount of time between when that pin was pinned to this board until it's pinned again to this board. I usually set our interval at 7 days, but there's no set number that you should be doing. So sometimes it's every 2 days, sometimes it's every 3 days, sometimes it's every 10 days. Some people even go every month or every quarter. It just depends. It depends on the pin itself, like what the content is. Is it seasonal? Is it a popular pin? Is it evergreen? There's just different factors that you have to decide how often you want that pin to be seen. I will say if it's a seasonal pin, so let's say it's like Halloween specific topic, then I'm going to be pinning that more frequently on more boards, like leading up to that holiday, Halloween. So my interval is going to be a little shorter. I might do 2 or 3 days. And is pinning again okay? People ask that a lot. And yes, it is okay. That's how we roll, man. That's how we do our thing. So we pin 10 pins a day. We only create one piece of content, core piece of content, once per week. So I'm putting 2, maybe 3 pins that are brand new on the platform once a week. But everything else that's filled up in that schedule, they're pins that have been pinned before. They're just dripping out to all of the relevant boards that I had assigned before. I'm going to conclude with this. The key to a successful pinning strategy is really about consistency and finding a great balance that works for your audience, what they are searching for, what they want from you, and your content, how often you're creating it. Don't overthink it. Just be consistent. Use a scheduler to help you stay consistent to pin daily. Be consistent with creating content. If you can do it weekly, that's ideal. Make sure it's quality content that your audience is searching for and wanting. And remember, Pinterest takes time. So if you're watching this video and you're thinking, great, I got my strategy down, next week, sure hope to have some traffic flowing in. It's just not going to happen. Pinterest takes time. We like to say 6 to 9 months of consistently marketing on Pinterest before you start to see how it's working for you, how your audience is grabbing up your content. I talked about video pins a little bit in this little video. So if you need some guidance on creating video pins, uploading video pins, watch this video next. See you next week.